I spent hours talking to him online. Every night after the kids went to bed, after Mark went to sleep, there he was. I mean, it wasn't like he was real or anything at the beginning. More like an idea. Someone who got me. Someone who liked listening to me. And that was new, you know? Mark stopped listening to my little dramas at work, my frustrations. That was years ago. Not that I blame him, of course. It's boring stuff. But this guy, I don't know, his name is Philippe, and he just got me. We were like virtual soulmates for 10 years, crazy, right? I'd never even seen his face or heard his voice. It was all words, and somehow that worked. It was enough. We could talk about anything. The kids, problems with my mom, how much I hated cleaning that giant house all by myself. You name it. Even sex, in a way. Not dirty or anything, but like what we wanted. What we hadn't had in forever. It's weird because Mark and I mean, things were fine. Good, even. We still had sex, not fireworks anymore, but it was all right. But Philippe, there was this whole other dimension. Like, a hunger. I never knew I had it till he came along. Then last summer, Philippe said he was going to be in Lyon. Lyon. Only like an hour away. He asked, and God, this sounds so stupid now, but he asked if we could meet. I know. What kind of a messed up situation is that, right? 10 years of talking, but we can't actually see each other. But what could I say? He was right there, so close. How could I not see what he looked like, hear his voice for real? So, I said yes. And we did. We did it. I can't even, it was like. I don't have words. Like waking up into another life, one where maybe I was a different person. A bolder person. It was wrong, I know that now, but at the moment? It felt like finding a missing part of myself. Okay, so. Afterward with Philippe, there was no, like, big moment of guilt. It wasn't like the movies where I suddenly think about Mark and burst into tears or something. Actually, things at home got better, weirdly. I felt, I don't know, lighter? Less cranky with the kids, and yeah, even with Mark. It wasn't even intentional, but suddenly I was more into sex with him. More eager. Like I wanted to explore with him. I mean, we've been together so long, it had all gotten so routine. It shocked me, I didn't know I had it in me. Mark seemed happy too, he just thought, oh good, she finally got over whatever was bothering her. Simple as that for him. The plan was to meet Philippe again as soon as possible. He had his whole business thing going on, but he was gonna come back to the area for a conference in a few months. Funny thing was, he said he didn't have feelings for me. Then it was, what did he call it? A connection of the mind. Okay, fine, but I wasn't being honest with myself. Of course, I was in love with him. The whole forbidden thing, the intensity, how could I not be? Then it all got messy. Work trips turned into quick weekend visits, and visits stretched into whole stolen weeks. Not always with Philippe. Sometimes it was just me renting a little Airbnb and pretending I was at a conference or something. Mark never suspected a thing. Why would he? We were that boring old married couple, past drama, settled into a comfortable life. He trusted me, the idiot. I started making up lies like I was good at it. About late nights at the office, business dinners, even a whole fake girls' spa weekend with my sister. It was pathetic, really. But somewhere in there, it stopped being about Philippe, about the romance. It was, I don't know, this feeling of power, maybe? Like I was getting away with something huge, right under my husband's nose. I was living this double life, and honestly, I kind of loved it. The excitement of it all, the risk, it was addictive. Things had settled into this weird rhythm. Philippe when I could, lying to Mark, a new kind of thrill from sneaking around. Then it started. Slipping. I couldn't hide it as well anymore. I'd always been a good liar, turns out mostly to myself. But now, it was like I was two people. One living this normal life, making dinner, doing laundry, and the other half of me somewhere else entirely. I became so careless. Phone always buzzing with messages I'd have to scramble to hide, excuses for being late or canceling plans with Mark at last minute. Mark started noticing little things. The way I'd jump when my phone buzzed, the absent way I'd stare at the wall while we were talking, like my brain was a million miles away. It's funny, I got better at lying, but I got worse at being normal. He'd ask what was wrong, and I'd get all defensive, snapping about how it was nothing, how work was stressful, the usual. And of course, the more I pulled away, the more suspicious he got. One night, it all came to a head. We hadn't even fought in years, but there I was, yelling at him across the kitchen table. It was about something stupid, I honestly don't even remember what. And suddenly, he just blurts it out, "Is there someone else?" I went ice cold, played it off, laughed even, like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever said. But my heart was pounding so hard, I thought I'd throw up right there in our perfect, expensive kitchen. He didn't buy it, not fully at least. There was this look on his face, this new kind of hurt. It was worse than his anger would have been. After that, things were tense. He tried being nice, extra attentive, which honestly only made me feel worse. Meanwhile, I had this awful knot in my stomach all the time. Then, the paranoia kicked in. He was always watching me, I swear. Checking my phone when I left the room, asking where I'd been in this careful way, looking for holes in my stories. A few weeks later, I saw him talking to someone in a parking lot. Really shady-looking guy, like something out of a cheap detective movie. And just like that, I knew. Mark didn't just think I was cheating anymore. He hired someone, a professional snoop, to follow me, dig into my life. Panic twisted through me, hot and sharp. It wasn't just the excitement of the double life anymore, it was real fear. I felt like I was suffocating, cornered. That same night, after I saw Mark meet with the sleazebag detective, I knew it was over. The jig was up, so I did something stupid. Something desperate. I messaged Philippe. I told him everything, about my suspicions, the detective, that our time was up. It took forever for him to answer. When he finally did, it was just one line. "I don't understand. I thought we agreed this was just fun." Just fun. I laughed out loud in our empty house, a choked, ugly sound. That's all I ever was to him, a bit of excitement, a fling. Then came the knock on the door. It was Mark. His face was, I don't even know, pale, eyes like holes burned into his face. He had this thick envelope in his hand. He didn't have to say anything. I knew those were the photos, the proof. "Get out," he said. His voice was so quiet, so broken. That's what hurt the most, worse than any shouting match I could imagine. I tried to talk, to explain. But the words stuck in my throat. It was all pathetic. The excuses, the apologies, even the bits of it that were true, about feeling trapped and unappreciated, or whatever. The bottom line was, I'd humiliated him, betrayed him in the deepest way. He wasn't having any of it. His voice grew louder, laced with this bitter anger I'd never heard before. "You don't get it, do you? Not about me, not about us. You don't even get who you are." He was right. I didn't. He thrust the envelope into my chest, knocking me backward. He didn't have to say it. I knew. "Pack your stuff and get the hell out of my house." I couldn't meet his eyes. All the fight drained out of me, replaced by this cold emptiness. I picked up the envelope and walked out, feeling the weight of his stare as I left. The night was a blur. I don't remember where I stayed. Maybe a cheap motel, maybe my car. There was a lot of crying. A lot of wishing I could undo everything. A part of me, a small, pathetic voice, hoped Mark would call, forgive me. But it never came. Just an email from a lawyer a few days later, the first step towards ending everything we built for 10 years. Just like that. I waited 2 days before going back. Pathetic, I know, but I was hoping the worst of his rage would subside. That maybe, with a little time, he'd soften. What a joke. The house felt wrong, alien. It was our house, but now it was only his. His lawyer had already been there, leaving papers that made my head hurt. Divorce, property division. Words that didn't seem real a week before. He was in the study. He didn't look up when I walked in, just kept staring at his computer. Mark, please, I started, but he cut me off. If you're here about your stuff, call the movers, he said, voice like ice. I'm paying for 1 month of storage, so they can take whatever you think you need. I just want to talk, I choked out, I can explain. He stood up then, towering over me. Explain what? How you snuck around with some faceless creep while I worked 2 jobs to build this life. How you made a fool out of me. There's nothing to explain. The begging started then. It was shameful. I pleaded, I cried, I promised anything. Change, therapy, whatever he wanted. It didn't make a dent. He'd shut down entirely. I learned then that forgiveness isn't something you can force. People talk about closure, but that's a lie too. There's no closing this mess, just the gaping absence where our life used to be. He wasn't just divorcing me, he was exiling me. My friends, his family, most took his side, and who could blame them? I became the cautionary tale, the woman whispered about at dinner parties. And Philippe, that great romance, my knight in shining armor? Ghosted. He vanished when it got real, when things got messy. His last text was, "This wasn't supposed to happen. Let's just forget it ever did." So there it was. The price of my little adventure. Loneliness, bone deep and relentless. Nights when the house echoed with empty silence, and a future I couldn't even bring myself to imagine. There's no going back, of course. There's only this new bleak existence, and the knowledge that I destroyed everything good in my life, all on my own. Months dragged by in a gray blur. I got a tiny apartment, all I could afford after the lawyers had their share. Took a crappy retail job. Ate a lot of frozen dinners and tried not to think about the life I'd thrown away. The only bright spot was, well, it wouldn't even qualify as a spot. A tiny flicker. Mark would occasionally email me, curt and businesslike, about some paperwork, a bill that needed sorting. At first, it hurt with a sharp, fresh pain every time. Then, it became just a thing that happened. Then one night I checked my junk mail, force of habit, and there it was, an email from Philippe. He was checking in, hoping I was okay, etc. Pathetic. I was mad, relieved, and disgusted all at once. I wrote back, kept it short. Turns out, Mr. Soulmate wasn't so perfect after all. A few emails later, he admitted it. He was married. Had kids. His online love affair was a bit of fantasy, a way to escape his dull life. Just like me. What a fool I'd been, strung along like a puppet. And the worst part was, it was almost a relief. It meant I wasn't completely crazy. The whole thing was built on a lie from the start. Somehow this made me a victim again, at least in my own warped thinking. The next email I sent was to Mark. Attached was my whole, sordid confession. Who Philippe was, our 10 years of online whatever it was, every dirty detail. Why? I don't know. Spite? A plea for more punishment? Some pathetic hope that revealing the full ugliness of my betrayal would make him understand? I got a call a few hours later. His voice was different. Tired. Older somehow. He told me to come back to the house. That we needed to talk. He'd found out, somehow, about Philippe's little family. He didn't say how. I didn't care. It was all out there. He was disgusted, sure, but there was a hint of something else. Pity, maybe? He wasn't the type to gloat, even after what I'd done. Why didn't you leave, if you were so unhappy? He asked. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? The one I still don't have a good answer to. We talked for hours, and when it was finally done, it turned out the answer didn't matter as much anymore. He said he could try to forgive me. Not that it would ever be the same. But try. For some reason I don't deserve. Something in him couldn't just write off 10 years completely. Foolish, probably. He's a better man than me, that's for sure. The first few nights back in my old bedroom were hell. I slept on the couch, or tried to. Mostly I just stared at the stupid floral curtains and thought about every lie I'd ever told in that room. Every time Mark was asleep beside me, trusting me completely, while I was sneaking around with that creep. Sleep, when it finally came, was worse. Nightmares twisted everything. Mark's face was Philippe's, grinning at me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding like it would burst. Even when I was awake, the shame was never far away. It clung to me, a rotten smell I couldn't wash off. Mark insisted on therapy. At first, it was just awkward silences. Or me crying, him sitting there, stony-faced. Our therapist, bless her, got us talking somehow. About stupid stuff at first, bad childhood memories, old fights. And through that, we started actually seeing each other again. Not the betrayed husband and the cheating wife, just people who used to love each other and maybe, just maybe, could find a way back. Then the bomb dropped, Philippe's wife found out, I don't know how. Maybe he confessed to save his own hide, the coward. The next thing I knew, she was waiting in the grocery store parking lot, screaming insults and spitting on my car. A crowd gathered, you bet someone filmed it and put it online. Our small town loves a good scandal. Suddenly I was the pariah. People crossing the street to avoid me, muttered whispers when I was forced to go out. This time it was different. Before, Mark had my back. Now, half the town saw him as a pathetic fool for even letting me back in the door. He tried to shield me, bless him. But he couldn't fight the whole world. The looks of pity, the judgment in his eyes when I opened yet another hate email. Those were worse than any public shaming. And worst of all was the fear. What if this broke him? What if he finally snapped and threw me out again? Only this time I'd have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. It made him colder, that's for sure. We were walking a tightrope, both of us. There were nights when I'd see him looking at his phone, hesitate before setting it down. That same sinking feeling would hit me. Was he finding comfort somewhere else? Was he giving up on me, on us, the way I deserved? I couldn't have blamed him, but God. The thought of losing him all over again was almost too much to bear. Therapy became this stupid game we played. He'd say how hurt he was. I'd say how sorry I was. We'd go around in circles, never actually getting anywhere. I could tell Mark was trying harder than he ever had for anything. But there was this wall between us now. A concrete wall with barbed wire on top, and no matter how sorry I was, I couldn't climb it. I didn't blame him for that. One night, it all came out. Everything that had been simmering since I moved back in. How he couldn't look at me without seeing him, picturing us. How even though he wanted to trust me, the doubt lingered. Was I texting some other man right then? Was this all just a game, waiting for my next escape? The worst part was, he wasn't wrong. I knew myself too well now. There'd always be that part of me, the reckless, selfish part. And now it had proof. It knew it could get away with it, survive it, maybe even get a second chance if it played its cards right. And that knowledge, it was a poison in our marriage. A week later, I packed my bags again. There was no yelling this time, just a quiet resignation on both our faces. An admitting of defeat. The movers came, took the furniture. The lawyer made sure my share of whatever was left was small, a fitting punishment. I moved away, far away. Took a crappy room in a rundown apartment complex. A fitting place for me. Mark visits sometimes. We talk on the phone more than you'd expect. The kids, well, they'll always be his kids. He doesn't blame me for that, even if he should. As for Felipe, the great love of my life, turns out his marriage didn't blow up like mine. He apologized via email for not being available to support me during this difficult time. He's living his perfect little life, while I'm picking up the pieces of mine. It's not fair, but who said life was? People want happy endings, or at the very least, a lesson at the end of the story. This isn't that kind of story. It's a messy one about broken people doing stupid things and leaving a trail of wreckage behind. There's regret, sure, but also anger and bitterness and a kind of hollow feeling, like a part of me got scooped out and never grew back. I guess that's the price you pay for being the kind of person who could do the things I've done. They say time heals all wounds. It's a lie. The pain of what I did never really goes away. It shifts, changes shape, becomes a dull ache instead of a sharp stab. But it's always there, lurking in the background. Even years later, sometimes I'll be going about my day, doing laundry, paying bills, whatever normal people do, and it hits me. I'll think about Mark, the kids, what they might be doing right then. I'll close my eyes and picture our old house, smell the stupid lemon cleaner I always used in the kitchen. A wave of regret and shame will wash over me strong enough to knock me down if I'm not careful. It's not just missing my old life. It's knowing why it's gone. I did this to myself. Every lie, every stupid choice I made brought me to this point, this half-existence. My therapist had a lot of fancy words about self-sabotage and broken attachment styles, but the truth is simpler. I wasn't a good person then. Maybe I'm not a good person now. It's lonely, being me. Sure, I made some new friends through work, but it's all surfaces. They don't know the real me, the one capable of hurting people the way I did. Sometimes I think about telling someone, just so I'm not the only one who carries the weight of it. But then I think about the look in their eyes when I confess, and what's the point? They'll never see me the same way again. The other day, I ran into one of Mark's old friends at the grocery store. I avoided her at first, but she practically cornered me. She asked how I was, then about Mark. Awkward isn't a strong enough word for it. Finally, she hinted about rumors she'd heard, about how things ended between us. I just said things didn't work out. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. I guess that's my life now. Half-truths and the lingering consequences of big mistakes. There's no fixing what I did, and no going back. All I can do is keep going, day by day. Maybe things get a little less bleak at some point. Or maybe they don't. Maybe all I'll ever be is the woman who threw everything away, and this is the price. Okay, so like, the wedding dress felt all wrong. It was beautiful or whatever, one of those fancy ones Mom picked out. But putting it on, it wasn't like in the movies, no magic moment. Just me, looking at myself in the mirror, and this gnawing feeling that I was making a mistake. Michael was beaming, though. He was blind to everything but how excited he was. That should have been the sign, right? To call it off. But then everyone's staring, flowers everywhere, Dad looking like he'd cry if I didn't walk down that aisle. So I did. I said the words, kissed Michael, and that stupid feeling got buried even deeper. We had a good few years, don't get me wrong. He tried. Trips, nice dinners, always asking about my day. It was fine. But that spark, that fire people talk about? Never there. And Greg, damn, he was the opposite of fine. Cheesy as hell, always smelled a bit like cheap cologne, probably lied about half the stuff he said. But it was exciting, even when it felt wrong. The looks in the office cafeteria, the coded texts, it was like a drug. Michael would come home talking about some new project, and my mind was miles away, replaying Greg whispering my name in some crappy motel room. Made me sick, but I couldn't stop. I'd think, next time's the last, I swear. But then there'd be another business trip, another late night at the office. Michael started getting suspicious, I bet. He's not dumb. Little questions, sideways looks. I got better at lying, colder towards him. Then there was the anniversary trip. Hawaii, the whole deal. I spent most of it sneaking off to text Greg, hating myself the whole time. Pathetic, right? That's when, well, you know the rest. Leaving, the mess, everything falling apart. Turns out, blowing up your life can get kind of lonely. And I deserved it, I guess. I still don't know what I was thinking, honestly. I started avoiding Michael's eyes. Before, I could at least fake a smile, pretend like everything was normal. But the closer our anniversary trip got, the worse the pit in my stomach felt. The thought of him being all romantic and sweet while I was fantasizing about Greg was like, I don't know, poison. Sarah's words were in my head on repeat. Killing him with kindness. She wasn't wrong. Every time Michael asked, excited for Hawaii, babe? I'd flinch. He'd chalk it up to work stress or something, bless his stupid, trusting heart. The worst part was, Sarah was basically my only friend left. Turns out, the girls from the office weren't so thrilled about the whole homewrecker thing, and my mom kept giving me those sad, disappointed looks that were way worse than yelling. Sarah would roll her eyes whenever I cried on her couch, but she'd still bring takeout and cheesy movies. Listen, she said one night, mid-rom-com, I'm not going to be your shoulder to cry on forever. You made this mess, so either clean it up or deal with the stink. Which is it gonna be? Harsh, but she was right. Michael didn't deserve this drawn-out torture. He deserved someone who'd actually be excited about him, and those stupid anniversary plans. Greg? Well, Greg was an idiot. But he wasn't the only guy in the world. I could start over, maybe even be, like, a decent person for once. Or I could keep spiraling and lose Sarah, the last friend I had left. The choice seemed pretty clear, even if doing the right thing made me feel like I wanted to puke. Telling my parents was, yeah, as bad as I expected. Mom cried first, then started in with this guilt trip about how I'd ruined the family's reputation, blah blah blah. Dad got all red-faced and wouldn't even look at me. He just kept muttering about disrespect and how Michael was a good man, which, ouch. The only bright spot was Jake. He showed up with a six-pack, gave me this half-hug, half-pat on the back thing that was surprisingly comforting. Well, sis, he said, cracking open a beer, looks like you've officially joined the family screw-up club. Welcome. That night, I stayed up packing. Jake passed out on the sofa after too many beers, snoring like a freight train. I should have felt relieved, or scared, or, I don't know, something. Instead, I felt numb. Like when you get a bad cut, and there's a moment before the pain really hits. That's what it was like, knowing freedom was waiting, but the hurt hadn't kicked in yet. The note on the kitchen table, man, writing that sucked. I tried a million different versions. It's not you, it's me, the classic. I need to find myself. All of them felt like lies. In the end, I went with brutally honest. I don't love you anymore, and I'm sorry. Short and to the point, no room for him to argue. Leaving was the worst and the easiest part. Michael was at some work dinner, thank God. I snuck out like a thief, suitcase in hand, Jake snoring behind me. Looking back at the house, I almost cried. Almost. But then, I imagined staying, trapped, and the tears dried up. I texted Michael from the car. Cowardly, yeah, but I couldn't face him. Then I called Sarah, and she answered with a groggy, what did you do now? Guess my track record wasn't so great anymore. Michael never called. That surprised me, honestly. Figured he'd at least yell a bit, demand some answers, something. But nothing. His sister's voicemail, though, that played on repeat in my head. Hope he was worth it. Like she knew, somehow, that this wasn't about finding true love, just running away from my own mess. Staying with Sarah wasn't an option long term. Her place was tiny, and her cat hated me, which, fair enough. So, I swallowed my pride and went crawling home with my tail between my legs. Mom started in again the moment I walked in the door, tears, accusations about humiliating the family. Dad just glared. Greg, bless his predictable heart, was at first all excited about me leaving my husband. He talked about getting an apartment together, how we could have a real relationship now. It only took about 2 days for me to realize this was a terrible idea. See, living with Greg was gross. Dirty dishes, clothes everywhere. He spent more time playing video games than his actual job. And that spark we had? It fizzled out fast once I was seeing him in stained sweatpants every day. I started snapping at him, criticizing everything, basically turning into my mom. One night, he actually snapped back. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea after all, he grumbled, eyes glued to the TV screen. Maybe Michael wasn't the problem. Oof, that hurt more than it should have. Problem was, he was right. I'd gone looking for something to fix what was wrong with me, and turns out, Greg was the wrong medicine. Time for Plan C, or maybe Plan Z, because let's be real, I was running out of options at this point. Okay. So, Jake's brilliant idea to scare off Greg? Telling him I was pregnant. Yeah, I know, messed up. But I was desperate. And honestly, after living with Greg for a few weeks, having a kid didn't sound much worse. Jake's a better actor than I gave him credit for. He pulled the whole concerned brother routine, telling Greg I was throwing up, having weird cravings, all that jazz. The look on Greg's face was priceless. A mix of panic and disgust. He mumbled something about not being ready for that and then practically ran out the door. Problem 1 solved, kind of, but my life was still a disaster zone. Jake crashing on my parents' sofa wasn't exactly calming the situation. He helped out with chores, which, surprisingly, softened Dad up a bit. Mom, though, she barely spoke to me, just these sighs every time I walked into a room. On the upside, Jake and I got back to being, well, us. We'd watch crap TV late into the night, make dumb jokes no one else would find funny. It was almost like being normal again, except for the massive elephant in the room, my non-existent baby. Then, the texts from Michael started. Short, awkward at first, just checking how I was doing, that kind of thing. Then, one night, like a bombshell, he mentioned he was seeing someone. Ouch. Should have made me feel relieved, right? To know he was moving on? Instead, it felt like a punch to the gut. Stupid, I know. Jake, for all his faults, is sometimes shockingly observant. You still got it bad for hubby, don't you? He was lounging on the sofa, beer in hand, grinning at me. I wanted to deny it, but the look on my face must have given me away. He shrugged. Your funeral, sis, just saying. Life has a way of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. Turns out, lying about a pregnancy in a small town has consequences. Who knew? Greg's ex tracked me down on Facebook, sent a whole rant about what a scumbag he was. Then came the news at work. People started looking at me with this mix of disgust and amusement. That's when I found out Greg had a reputation. Sarah, bless her, came over with a bottle of wine and a ton of takeout. Look, she said, shoving a greasy spring roll in my face, time to face facts. You screwed up, and you're going to pay for it. For a while, anyway. The whispers at work were the worst. I'd walk down the hallway, and conversations would stop. The break room, usually buzzing with gossip, went silent when I walked in. Sarah kept telling me to ignore it, that people would get bored eventually. She was probably right, but every day felt like trudging through mud. When the fake pregnancy finally hit the 9-month mark, it was almost a relief. No more awkward questions or pitying stares. Just silence, like everyone was waiting to see what kind of pathetic excuse I'd come up with next. Then the mail came. Divorce papers. Michael's lawyer, some slick Sue type, didn't even bother meeting in person. He just had his assistant hand me the envelope in the parking lot at work. No drama, barely even a conversation. Just me standing there, feeling all those eyes on me, while holding papers that said my marriage was officially dead. Went home. Locked myself in the bathroom, and cried until I couldn't anymore. Jake was out with his friends, thank God. The last thing I needed was his sarcasm right then. I just wanted to disappear, become someone else, anyone else, who hadn't managed to screw up every inch of her life in less than a year. Sarah was right, it's a stupid, obvious thing, but sometimes you don't understand until it punches you in the face. I chose this, chose to blow up my life, chose to lie, chose all the wrong things. And now, I was paying for it. My parents' house was its own type of torture. Mom gave me the guest room, which was nice of her, but it just made me feel more like a temporary problem she hoped would pack up and leave soon. Dad avoided eye contact, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled at me. He made me feel invisible. Job interviews were disastrous. The second anyone Googled me, it was over. They'd smile politely, say those, "we'll be in touch," lies, and I'd watch their face change as they walked me out. I felt radioactive. One night, at like 2 a.m., I was on the couch with a pint of ice cream, watching some reality show about people with hoarding problems, and it hit me, this was rock bottom. Messy hair, stained sweatpants, surrounded by junk food, feeling sorry for myself while judging people with way worse lives. Pathetic. I texted Jake, "Save me from this hellhole," was all I sent. He showed up the next morning, that goofy grin on his face. "Well, sis," he announced, tossing a backpack on the floor, "looks like we're gonna be roomies again. Hope you didn't toss my old bang." He was joking, but there was some truth to it. He was probably the only person left who wouldn't slam the door in my face. I didn't feel like I deserved it, honestly. But sometimes, you gotta take what you can get, right? After Jake finally found a place of his own, a total dump, obviously, the apartment felt weirdly quiet. Turns out, having a crash course in rock bottom with your screw-up brother is way more entertaining than staring at a ceiling fan alone at night. The silence was the worst, giving my brain way too much time to replay every stupid decision I'd made. The looks started getting to me. Not the mean ones, almost worse were those sad, pitying glances. At the grocery store, from the old ladies who used to smile at me and Michael, even the cashier who used to ask about my day seemed to avoid my eyes now. Mom's concern was suffocating. She'd pop in my room with tea and cookies, like that would fix anything. Her bridge club friends were the absolute worst, whispering about me behind their hands like I wasn't right there. I started pretending to be asleep when they came over, just to escape their fake sympathy. Sleep was impossible most nights. Then my doctor, this sweet older lady who'd known me since I was a kid, suggested antidepressants. The idea, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. The girl who messed everything up so spectacularly she needed pills to just function. I wasn't there yet, maybe I never would be, but the thought alone terrified me. Instead, I took the over-the-counter sleeping pills. They turned my brain into mush, at least for a few hours. It wasn't a solution, not a real one, but it was something. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure it out, get back on my feet. But deep down, that feeling in my gut, the one that started this whole mess? It was back, telling me this was just the beginning of a very... I never imagined the sound of waves crashing against the shore could feel so ominous. That night, our room filled with a deceptive calm, the kind that precedes a storm. It was our honeymoon, for God's sake, in a quaint coastal town where the biggest scandal usually involved a seagull stealing a tourist sandwich. Maria and I were supposed to be basking in the afterglow of our vows, not this. It started with a glow, the faint light from Maria's phone illuminating her face in the dark. She didn't see me watching, too engrossed in her secret conversation. My heart raced, a mix of confusion and the first tinges of suspicion. Who could it be at this hour? I wondered, the seeds of doubt planting themselves firmly in my mind. The next day, under the guise of casual conversation, I asked, "Who were you texting last night so late?" Her response was too quick, too rehearsed. "Oh, just an old friend. Nothing important." But her eyes, they darted away too fast. Something didn't add up. I couldn't let it go. The trust one thought was unbreakable began to show its first cracks. I started to monitor her more closely, an act that felt foreign in the context of our relationship. Her phone, once an open book, became her constant companion, shielded from my view. Social media, which had been our shared space, now seemed like a minefield. Then, I found it. Messages, photos, the kind of evidence you can't unsee. Intimate exchanges with Tom, her coworker. My world stopped. The betrayal was visceral, a physical blow to the gut. I felt foolish, enraged, and heartbroken all at once. I faced a choice: confront her and unleash a storm of anger and hurt, or leave. I chose the latter. Packing my bags while she was out for a morning walk, I left our honeymoon suite without a word. The drive to the airport was a blur, each mile widening the chasm between the life I thought I had and the shattered reality now before me. I flew back home alone, a silent goodbye to what could have been. The ring on my finger felt like a mockery of the vows we had just taken. In those moments, the future we had envisioned together dissolved, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of a love that turned out to be a lie. The barrage of texts and voicemails started the moment my plane touched down back home. "Alex, please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." Maria's voice, a mix of desperation and denial, echoed through my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to listen to the whole messages. Each plea was a reminder of the betrayal, and I found solace only in the silence that came from hitting delete. Trying to stitch my life back together, I threw myself into my work. Coding. Once a mere job, became my refuge, the lines of code a welcome distraction from the chaos of my personal life. My friends, aware of the storm I was weathering, became my anchor, their attempts to drag me out for a beer or a game night often the only thing that broke through the numbness. But Maria wasn't giving up. Her messages started coming through the voices of mutual friends. "Maria's really broken up about this man. She just wants a chance to explain." I couldn't fault them for trying. They only knew her side, the facade she presented to the world. But I knew the truth that lay hidden in her phone, a truth that no amount of pleading could erase. The decision to file for an annulment came as a relief. It was a step towards closure, a way to officially sever the ties that bound me to a marriage built on lies. The paperwork, clinical and impersonal, was a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil it represented. Each signature was a step away from Maria and the life I thought we were building together. Maria's reaction to the annulment was as public as it was manipulative. Her social media became a canvas for her sorrow, cryptic posts about love lost and mistakes made painting her as the victim. "If only hearts knew how to heal as quickly as they break," one post read, garnering a flood of sympathetic comments from those unaware of the real story. It was a performance worthy of an award, but I knew the truth behind the mask. The Maria who pleaded for understanding in public was the same one who had betrayed our vows in private. And no amount of public sympathy could change that. The moment the scandal hit, my phone exploded with notifications. Every buzz was a reminder of the nightmare I was living, a public spectacle I never signed up for. The intimate messages and photos Maria and Tom had exchanged, now laid bare for the world to see. It felt like a surreal punch to the gut, revisiting the betrayal in such a public and humiliating way. The shift in public opinion was palpable. Suddenly, the sympathy that had once been directed at Maria for our sudden breakup was now squarely on me. Friends, family, and even strangers on social media rallied to my side, condemning her actions and offering support. It was a cold comfort, knowing that my most private pain had become public fodder. Then, Maria's apology came. A video, posted for all to see, where she looked into the camera, her eyes welling with tears, admitting her mistake and asking for forgiveness. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused Alex and everyone affected by my actions," she said, her voice breaking. It was a gesture, perhaps too little too late, but it was clear she understood the gravity of her mistake. Despite her public plea, I chose silence. Engaging with the spectacle felt like adding fuel to a fire I desperately wanted to extinguish. My focus was on moving forward, on healing from the betrayal without the added drama of a public back and forth. Maria's apology, while necessary, wasn't for me to accept in the public eye. Forgiveness, if it was to come, would be a private affair, far from the prying eyes of social media. Our mutual friends found themselves in an uncomfortable position, forced to pick sides in a drama none of us wanted. It was telling, the choices made. Most sided with me, unable to overlook the breach of trust Maria had committed. Conversations were had, some awkward, some supportive, but all underscored by a sense of loss. The fabric of our social circle was irrevocably changed, torn by the actions of one night that spiraled into a scandal none of us could have predicted. In the end, the leak, the public outcry, Maria's apology, and the division among our friends painted a vivid picture of the fallout from betrayal. It was a harsh reminder that actions have consequences, often far-reaching and deeply felt by all involved. As I navigated this new reality, my silence was my shield, a way to protect what little privacy I had left in a story that had become all too public. The day the annulment papers landed in my mailbox felt like both an ending and a beginning. It was official. The marriage that had started with so much promise had ended not with a bang but with the quiet shuffle of paperwork. I stood there for a moment, papers in hand, allowing myself a deep breath. It was over. Maria and I were no longer tied together by law, only by the memories of what had been and what had gone so terribly wrong. But life, as it always does, moved on. The aftermath of our public scandal had far-reaching consequences. Maria lost her job because of the negative attention our situation had garnered. It was a harsh reminder of how deeply personal decisions can bleed into professional life. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, trying to piece her life back together in a city that had become too small for her secrets. Tom, her coworker and the other man in the equation, vanished almost as quickly as the scandal broke. He left the city, leaving behind whispers and shattered reputations. His departure didn't bring me any sense of satisfaction. If anything, it was a bleak acknowledgement of the fallout that comes from selfish choices. In the midst of it all, Maria tried to start over. She moved to a new city, seeking anonymity and a fresh start. I wondered sometimes if she found what she was looking for, if the change of scenery gave her the peace she needed, or if the ghosts of her actions followed her no matter how far she ran. As for me, I cautiously stepped back into the world of dating. Jenna, a colleague I'd known for years, became a surprising source of comfort and eventually, something more. She knew my history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, yet she chose to look beyond it. Our relationship wasn't built on the fiery passion that had marked my time with Maria but on a solid foundation of trust, respect, and a shared history of friendship that slowly blossomed into love. Starting a new relationship after such a public betrayal was daunting. Jenna and I moved slowly, carefully navigating the waters of this new beginning. There were no grand declarations or impulsive decisions, just two people learning to build something new out of the wreckage of the past. In this chapter of my life, I found a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The drama that had consumed my life seemed to settle, giving way to a quiet happiness I hadn't dared hope for. The finalization of the annulment closed one door, but with Jenna, I was ready to step through another, into a future that looked nothing like I had planned but everything I needed. Just when I thought I'd turned a corner, the past came knocking, literally. 5 months had flown by, a period of healing and building something new with Jenna. Life was finally feeling like it belonged to me again. Then, Maria returned to the city. I heard at first from a mutual friend, a warning that she was back and looking for me, claiming she had changed and needed to apologize in person. I didn't know what to feel, anger, pity, or just a profound sense of tiredness. I chose to ignore it, hoping she'd get the message that I was done and had moved on. But Maria had other ideas. One ordinary Tuesday turned extraordinary when she showed up at my workplace, unannounced and unwelcome. I saw her from the window, arguing with the receptionist, her gestures wild and desperate. My heart raced, not with fear, but with an irritation so intense it bordered on anger. My colleagues watched, some with curiosity, others with concern, as the scene unfolded like a bad soap opera. I stayed back, hidden from her view, unwilling to engage in a confrontation that would serve no purpose. Jenna, ever the rock in the storm, stood by me with unwavering support. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said, her hand finding mine, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Her understanding and willingness to face this with me only deepened my feelings for her. Jenna wasn't just someone I was dating, she was becoming my partner in every sense of the word. But Maria's attempts didn't stop with the scene at my office. Letters began to arrive at my home, each filled with apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. Gifts accompanied some. Tokens of her remorse, all of which felt like chains trying to pull me back into a past I'd fought hard to escape. Each envelope, every package, was a reminder of a chapter one had closed, yet here she was, trying to rewrite the ending. Enough was enough. I couldn't live like this, looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next letter, the next attempt to invade the peaceful life I was building with Jenna. The decision to file for a restraining order wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It was a declaration, loud and clear, that I was no longer the man Maria had left behind. I was someone new, someone who valued his peace and the love he had found with Jenna over any remnants of a broken past. The day I filed the paperwork, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was taking steps to protect myself and my future, and sadness for the man I used to be, who had loved Maria with a naivety that seemed foreign to me now. This was more than just legal documents, it was a final goodbye to a part of my life that had shaped me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Jenna was there, as she always was, a steady presence in the whirlwind that had become my life. Together, we faced the future, not knowing what it held but ready for whatever came our way, bound by a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger. Maria's return and her subsequent actions had been a storm, but in its wake, it left clarity and a resolve that whatever lay ahead, Jenna and I would face it together. The day Maria violated the restraining order, everything came to a head. It was early evening, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped low. Jenna and I were in the middle of dinner, a simple meal shared in the quiet comfort of our home, when the unmistakable sound of someone at the door shattered the peace. Jenna's glance met mine, an unspoken question hanging between us. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Rising from the table, I approached the door, the sense of unease growing with each step. Opening it, I found Maria standing on my doorstep, her presence a blatant disregard for the legal boundaries set to protect my peace. The shock of seeing her there, after everything, was like a cold wave crashing over me. Before I could react, Jenna was by my side, her presence a silent show of support. The situation escalated quickly as Maria began to plead her case, her words a jumbled mess of apologies and excuses. It was clear she was unraveling, her desperation palpable in the evening air. The decision to call the police wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Watching as they took Maria away, I felt a mix of relief and profound sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to end, but it seemed inevitable given the path Maria had chosen. The court case that followed was a public spectacle, drawing more attention than I wanted. Sitting in the courtroom, waiting for my turn to testify, I felt the weight of the eyes on me, the silent judgment of those who didn't understand the full story. When I spoke, my voice was steady, my words clear. I recounted the harassment, the repeated violations of my boundaries, and my desire for nothing more than to move on with my life. It wasn't just about seeking justice, it was about reclaiming my sense of safety, my right to peace. Maria's guilty plea was a small comfort, her sentence of community service and mandatory counseling a hope that maybe, just maybe, she would find her way to a better place. As the judge handed down the sentence, I couldn't help but feel that this was a turning point, not just for me, but for Maria as well. The public's reaction to the case was overwhelmingly supportive. Friends, family, and even strangers reached out, their words a balm for the wounds that had been so publicly displayed. It was a reminder that, despite everything, there was a community ready to stand by me, to help me pick up the pieces and rebuild. As Jenna and I walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, I felt the weight of the past months start to lift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with the court case behind us and the support of those we loved, it felt like we were finally stepping out of the shadow of my marriage to Maria and into the light of a new beginning. In the weeks following the court case, life started to resemble something normal, or at least, as normal as it could get under the circumstances. Jenna and I found solace in each other, our relationship deepening in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was as if the trials had acted as a crucible, strengthening our bond, forging trust and understanding that seemed unbreakable. We leaned into the comfort of our shared experiences, the laughter and love that blossomed amidst the chaos serving as a testament to what we'd overcome together. Meanwhile, Maria embarked on her own journey of reflection. Counseling, as part of her sentence, seemed to have sparked a genuine introspection on her part. Through mutual friends, I heard whispers of her progress, of the remorse she felt, and her attempts to better herself. It was a far cry from the Maria the first had known, and part of me hoped that she would find the peace she was seeking, even if our paths were never to cross again. However, the continuous drama took its toll professionally. My work, once a place of refuge, became a source of stress. The tension with my boss escalated, the undercurrent of my personal life seeping into my professional demeanor. Deadlines started to whoosh by, my focus scattered, the quality of my work suffering. Conversations with my boss grew terse, the disappointment in his voice a clear indicator that something had to give. The final confrontation with Maria was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. She appeared outside my workplace one afternoon, a ghost from the past I had hoped to never encounter again. Her presence was a stark reminder of the turmoil that had once consumed my life. She approached me tentatively, an apology lingering in her eyes, but the words that came were too little, too late. "I'm sorry, Alex, truly, I am. I just want you to know that I understand now the hurt I caused, and I'm trying to make amends," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My response was firm, the finality of my decision clear. "Maria, there's nothing left to say. I've moved on, and I wish you well, but I don't want or need your apologies. Please, respect my wishes and let's just leave the past in the past." Her acceptance of my rejection marked the end of our saga. The realization that our story was truly over seemed to hit Maria hard. The news of her subsequent breakdown reached me through the grapevine, a sad epilogue to a chapter one had closed. It pained me to hear of her suffering, but it was a path she had to walk alone. Our lives had diverged, the bridges between us burnt to ash, leaving us to navigate the consequences of our actions in solitude. In the aftermath, Jenna and I continued to build our life together, the lessons of the past etched deeply in our foundation. The experience had taught me the value of trust, the importance of forgiveness, and the strength found in letting go. As I moved forward, the shadows of the past lingered, a reminder of the journey traveled and the growth that came from its